Thank you for downloading The Bottom Line. In this edition, Evan Davies and guests explore the ups and downs of doing business with your relatives.
Hello and welcome to the programme. And we enter the world of the family business today. Family and firms are perhaps the two most important institutions in much of the world, and they are often entwined. Indeed, the majority of businesses are family-controlled, from millions of unsung, modestly sized firms to commercial giants such as Ford, Samsung and Hyundai. Well, we'll hear about some of the merits of working with your relatives, as well as the downsides, as if families didn't have enough to argue about. But let's start by meeting my three guests. And actually what I'd like to do from each of you is hear what you do, what the business does, and where it all started. And first up is Ian McLean, Managing Director, and I think seventh generation, Ian, of the luxury knitwear company John Smedley. Tell us about the company first. It's people may well have heard of it, of course.
It's a very old company, one of the oldest manufacturing factories in the world. We're based in Derbyshire, in the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, which started in about 1771 with Richard Arkwright's factory. Our factory started in 1784, so just after that.
Oh, you latecomers. Yeah.
Yes, I know. The history of John Smedley is in essence the history of manufacturing. We converted fibre into yarn and then yarn into garments, and those garments in the 1800s and the early 1900s were sold under the names of wholesalers or other retailers like Harrods or Selfridges, for example. In the 1930s, my great-grandfather took the decision which was a very, very important decision in the history of the company, to change from selling exclusively through wholesalers to selling directly to retailers, and he hired his own mobile sales force and bought them cars. And actually I have the most wonderful photograph of them all lined up wearing their bowler hats getting ready to go on the road. And at that point he began to sell the knitwear under the John Smedley name, and that really has been key to the success and the longevity of the business since the 1930s.
Right, so 7 generations, that is an extraordinarily long story.
Yes, it is, yeah.
What relation are you to the person who started it?
Fairly distant relation. There have been a couple of sets of cousins in between. With succession, sometimes it's easy to plan and sometimes it's more difficult. Back in, I think it was the 1850s, one gentleman who had succeeded his uncle to look after the business died very suddenly, just at the age of 44. And the next generation was so young they couldn't inherit the running of the business, so they inherited it through managers, if you like. And so it's been a little bit of a tortuous route, but my grandmother on my father's side of the family was Smedley, so that's the link to me, if you like.
Right, but it is extraordinary, because I think you have just about the world's oldest working factory. I'm sure there are one or two other pretenders to the crown, but
that's
it's right there at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. OK, well, also with us, a much younger company, we have Julie White, who's Managing Director of D-Drill. And I think you better explain what D-Drill does, Julie, first of all.
We do diamond drilling and sawing of concrete and controlled demolition for the construction and civil industries.
Right, is that an exciting business to be in?
It's fantastic. Concrete cutting is so sexy, it's unbelievable.
So it's a niche construction
It is. It's a very, very specialised. So what we can do is very simple. We'll drill you a very simple hole through a reinforced floor or wall for a pipe, cut you an opening for an escalator pit. We can actually cut down a motorway bridge. We can demolish a nuclear power station. So it's huge, our industry. It's absolutely huge.
Now, your father set up the business, so
That's
you're
correct.
second generation.
I am second generation, that's right. But I did a management buyout of the company in 2008, and there is no family other than me in the company anymore.
It's not really a family business anymore.
No, that's right,
because
yes.
You bought the whole lot.
I did buy the whole lot.
And we'll hear why you did that
yes.
as the programme goes through. And your father set the business up, but it was a family business. He set it up with his brother.
That's right, with his brother. My mother is involved, my brother's wife was involved, and then I had some cousins involved as I bought the company out.
And that was just 2008.
That's
so
right, yeah.
Fairly recently it's become your own.
Head office is in Coventry, but then we have 10 branches.
All right, well, before we get the full story on your business, let's meet my final guest. Like you, Julie, also in the construction industry, Tim Waits of Waits, a wholly family-owned construction and development company. Tim, tell us what the sort of roots of your business were.
Well, the roots of our business were founded in 1897 by my great-grandfather, who worked in a furniture shop, and the family story is that he wanted a bonus and wasn't given it, so walked out. And he had to think what to do, and his father funded him and his brother to build a couple of houses in Purley.
Right.
And from there, the business grew and changed many times over time, but that's the root of the company.
Okay, so what's your relation to him is...
He is my great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather. So it's
Yeah.
pretty direct, actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
And what's your role in the company?
I'm chairman of the Waits Family Council, which is a bit of slightly obscure family governance, but it's to do with chairing the family rather than the company. And then I'm a director on the Waits Group board, and I chair our housing businesses.
Right. Now, Waits, just for people to know the company better, you've built some notable things, haven't
Yep.
you?
Well, we're building quite a lot of schools in Abu Dhabi. In the UK, you may know the Margaret Thatcher Infirmary, Chelsea Hospital, Woolwich Town Hall.
All right, well, we've heard the basics now about your businesses. Let's talk about what works and what doesn't. But let's start at the very beginning. When did you each first become involved, first become aware of your family businesses? Because presumably it starts at quite a young age. Julie?
I grew up with it. I mean, it was there from the very, very start. The company was actually started 3 months before I was born. So for me, it was always there. The nicest parts of my growing up was when Deidre was around. There was a bad part when my mother used to have a red phone in the house when the company was run from the house. It used to ring all the time, so she really couldn't play with me very often.
So what was the red phone for?
Phone calls used to come from the men or from the clients, the customers, so she was answering it. And when my father was around, because he was away a lot, when he was around there was always diamond drillers and operatives sleeping on the floor. There was always a big pot of casserole going on. You know, there was always a lot of action. I would come down in the middle of the night, my dad would be, you know, fixing the machine on the kitchen table, and I would be timed that I'd just sit and talk to him, and we'd talk.
Did you feel a bit deprived as a
No,
child?
not at all.
They
It
were
was
sort of
amazing.
their attention was
No, I knew
split?
nothing else, but I mean, it was fantastic. My mother would want to get rid of me at the weekend, so I used to go on site. Back in those days, the health and safety wasn't as tight, and I used to go on site with my dad, and I used to go and plug the water in, the electric. I'd go and get the drills out, the vans. It was the best feeling. And when people asked me, was I going to take the company on, or would I be involved? And the answer was yes.
So the family identity and the corporate identity
Yeah.
absolutely entwined there. I mean, in your case, though, Ian, I mean, it's a much, much older company.
Very different experience. I mean, I grew up in Halifax in Yorkshire. My father, his full-time job was in the carpet industry in Halifax, and my grandfather, who would have been chairman of John Smedley at the time, was also chairman of the Halifax Building Society. So, you know, the businesses that I knew were those two institutions. So when I was young, really, for me, no contact with John Smedley at all. And I think because of the disparate nature of the family of my generation, I think many of my cousins and others would probably have shared a similar experience. I do recall once or twice as a teenager coming to annual general meetings at the company, but it didn't really make much of an impression on me, I don't think, until I was in my early 20s and I was starting out in my own business career, if you like. And I think the family at that time would have been looking at the younger generation and thinking, you know, who had the relevant experience to represent the family on the board, and I started at that point to turn towards me.
But it hadn't
wasn't
been
until then that
right.
I really.
You weren't as a 3-year-old
Definitely
thinking my place is going to be in the factory.
And that's not expected in our family. No, there is no expectation that a young family member will be brought up, educated and given experiences to train them for this particular business.
It's been around so long,
Yes.
presumably in your case, that there are quite a few cousins and relatives who are candidates for being involved.
Yes.
So
I mean, the last person to run the business full time was my great-grandfather, and he died in 1959, having been chairman of the business for 70 years, would you believe, since he was...
Sorry, 70 years.
70. It must be
chairman.
some kind of British record for running a business.
Wow.
He inherited it when he was 22 and died when he was 92. So since he died, the family's role has been not executive, it has been non-executive representation, both as chairman and non-executive directors on the board, and professional managers have run the business since then.
What about you, Tim?
I think in our family we were generally imbued with weights, but I feel there was very much a sort of flexible approach. I think my father felt that actually what he wanted for me was for me to be fulfilled and happy, and he hoped weights would be part of that. And that's exactly the philosophy I have with my children.
I must say, I don't understand family businesses, because the essence of them is you're working with people who you're connected with by blood.
Yeah.
So you've sort of narrowed the range, the field of people who you might be working with to a tiny little proportion of the human race. It's very unlikely that those are going to be the best people for you to be in business with. I mean, how do you pick who's going to run a family business?
I think it was very easy for me because my father thought that women shouldn't be in construction, shouldn't be anywhere near a construction site. So it was easy for me. He'd never ever put any pressure on me. But when I first started my first company doing floor preparation and built it to be a very successful company, he started to think, that I was the only person that had gone into construction on my own merit.
Because, we should say you went into a flooring business.
That's right. And I started it from scratch.
And it made a success of it. So suddenly you look like the best candidate.
Yeah.
But was there sort of sibling rivalry?
No, I am the only child, so he probably thought it was going to end there, or it would go to his brother's children. And it was happened to be on the 19th hole of the golf course, drinking our 4th pint, and we had a bet. My father actually said to me, have you ever thought about taking Deidre on? And I said, no, I don't want to take you and the family on, no, I'm quite happy with my own company. And I said, well, the only reason I would take it is if I could buy it. He said to me, you're not big enough to buy me. And I said...
oh, that's a challenge to a feisty daughter, isn't it?
And I said to him, well, you'll never be able to get 100% ownership from the family for me to buy it.
But you didn't want to inherit it, basically?
No, I didn't want to, because I know my dad's a feisty character. I knew he could never let it go, and I just needed to make it younger and vibrant.
Tim?
I take your point exactly. Clearly, the gene pool of family is narrow. Now, we, I think, have really acknowledged that in our family, and so we separate the family and the business, and we have recruited the very best non-family chief executive to run our show, because we sort of understand that out there, truthfully, let's face it, there are more able executives than us in the family.
Right.
And we have to sort of slightly eat a bit of humble pie, acknowledge that, get on with it, and actually concentrate on being absolutely great owners and creating the best environment for those executives to really, really flourish. Because the guy, our chief executive, Paul Drexler, is an outstanding manager. He was on the main board at ICI. If I start to try and tell him how to do stuff, he'll be gone. We recruit the very, very best, and they want to be given their head.
I'm not sure I'd actually like to be a manager in a company where there's a family on my back and they're sort of united. But anyway, I mean, in your position is very different because you are the family member and you are running the show.
That's right.
You did get the job yourself. I mean, you are a family member. You were the best for the job. Yeah. You had gone out.
Did you have to interview?
Had another
did you have all your
career.
cousins there interviewing? Did you have all your cousins?
To an extent, yes. But frankly, I put my case to the other non-executive directors on the board at that time that I felt I could do the job at this time, and I felt that the family needed to have a stronger representation within the business, and they agreed for me to do that. That's as much as I can say about it.
So you got it. And the company had been open-minded because it clearly had non-family members running it for some years. Let's just talk about ownership, because I think there's a bit of a contrast between two of you here.
Yep.
Tim, how many shareholders have you got?
We have 8 shareholders, of whom 3 are retired.
8 shareholders, so it's quite a manageable group. Basically, you can get in and run.
I mean, considering a 4th generation, it's absolutely amazing. And if you look at the actual enormous amount of members of the Waits family, you can hardly believe there's only 8 shareholders of Waits Group. But we have been very focused on pruning the tree at each generation and buying people out who don't wish to continue in the business, because we are very clear that a real key to long-term family business ownership is having the minimum number of shareholders possible.
A table full, basically.
A table. If you sit around a table and can talk, that's what you want.
Right. Julie, you've got 1 shareholder, so you're very, very straightforward.
I am very, very
but,
straightforward.
I think, Ian, again, your business is just older, bigger, more established in some sense. You've got loads of shareholders, haven't you?
Yes, we have over 90 shareholders. The family are in the biggest majority as a shareholder, but there are former directors and employees who were given shares in their time who are shareholders as well. It's a very, very interesting question. How do you manage the shareholding over time when you need key votes on particular issues, and they may only come up every 10, 20 or even generationally, these issues, but how do you manage it?
Do you all get together?
It's a really difficult.
Do you all have Christmas dinner or talk about?
Well, I think in our case, the interesting thing is that there's a generation who are probably in their 70s and 80s who are all first cousins predominantly, or brothers and sisters, and that shareholding group is still dominant amongst the shareholding as a whole. So whatever decision they decide to take, others, their children, will effectively follow. But the real challenge is when you come to a generational change and you get people who are more distantly related, possibly don't know each other as well as their parents or grandparents did. How do you bring a cohesive outlook, strategy and ability to allow a management team to make its decisions and get on with the business without fighting each other?
Tim,
governance structures in themselves do not work. In the end, it's all about the soft issues and behaviours of the family and the culture of the family working together. So you can put in the most marvellous governance structure of all time, and you have a total disaster because the family are not functional.
I mean, like, there's a lot of companies out there, husband and wives, brothers and sisters, and it doesn't make sense when there's family involved. This is what I always...
You're speaking with a sort of sense of experience, world-weary experience.
The worst experiences was when because my mother used to make the diamond drills. She used to buy the diamonds from Davies. She used to get tungsten powder from Holland. She used to make the diamond drills because we couldn't buy them because we were the very first diamond drilling company in Europe. So you can imagine there was only me as a child around our dinner table. My father would go, well, I see that you've just sold one of my competitors, at a cheaper price that you sell me. And she said, well, he bought more. And there'd be an argument. And I'd have my fish fingers and chips,
They don't, because they don't realise they're family businesses. And so that's the whole thing. I honestly promise you, Waits, I don't think we realised in the 1990s that we were a family business. And once you realise you are, and then look out and see how others do it, suddenly you see, oh my goodness, it does happen. Others have followed this path, and we can learn from them.
One thing between a husband and wife, Julie, but I mean, if you're talking about cousins, I mean, in every family there are tensions between some relatives or other, and that's without them even having any business.
And sometimes you can be in the boardroom, and I spent many a time, even when my first company, and I came to the boardroom. Sometimes it didn't make sense. It was, it was emotion. It was personal.
But there's emotion in family relations, as I say, without the business thing. Now, if you're in a PLC, how does conflict get resolved? What's the difference? So basically, you either resolve it or one goes.
Or one goes. It gets resolved 80-20, and normally the loser departs. And in family businesses, you're in that boat forever. You can't do it that way. You can't do it that way.
But isn't that just the most terrible disadvantage for family businesses? I mean, I don't know how they survive.
The good ones work.
That's the point. The good ones really do work.
They do.
And it's fantastic. I honestly can say I love my family, people I work with, genuinely. It is love.
Yes,
and I love working with them. They're great fun. Occasionally, I mean, they do annoy you and stuff. We've spent lots of days together with psychotherapists, I promise you, in rooms.
Well, hang on a minute. What's this?
Working through what sort of personality types are we, and how do we deal with conflict, etc., etc.
As a family, you do this, isn't
we
it?
We do, because and when you look at the family business academics, I promise you, they tend to have degrees in strategy and degrees in dealing with how families work. The two things are melded in family business governance. So we as a family, two things: get our strategy really well organised and work extremely hard on our relationships and understanding each other so that we don't have conflict. So while there may be disagreements, the conflicts have never turned into a horrible, destructive conflict.
The sort of long-running ones that just never sort of die.
Yeah, I think sometimes in families you get a bit of repetitive conflict. And I think in our generation, we've been really sort of conscious. We've seen it, that sort of has happened in the third generation a little bit. And we just don't want to live a life like that. If there's an issue, we talk about it. So I've definitely got my faults, and if they wanted to focus on them, there's no doubt they could find lots of faults in me.
Did the psychologist come up with any faults?
For me, yeah. Yes. I think I was described as Paxman. So if I could get a bit carried away and start sort of arguing with someone just for the sake of it. So I think that my brothers and cousins found that very, very irritating. So I sort of know that and try not to do it.
It sounds like we're focusing on a lot of negatives here. We will get to some positives about family businesses as well, I promise. But let me just remind you, we're talking family firms with Ian McLean of knitwear supplier John Smedley, Julie White of the drilling company D-Drill, and Tim Waite of the construction firm Waite. I should also say we do enjoy reading emails, by the way, from listeners. Comments, quips, complaints, any thoughts you have. Just drop us a line at thebottomline@bbc.co.uk. Now, I said we're going to talk about some positives. Before we do, let's just focus on the negatives a little more. The American writer Francis Fukuyama wrote a fascinating book in the 1990s about economic development and said there are cultures and countries where people so don't trust each other, the only people they'll do business with are their brethren, the family. And he points to some Latin countries that are like that. And he says it holds back their economic development. I wonder whether you could really expand, for example. I mean, raising capital. Where do you get the capital from? You just have to go and borrow it, presumably.
I mean, in fact, patient capital, and you build your own balance sheet, and you retain your earnings. Not too many dividends would be the sort of... You roll your business up into bigger and bigger over time. But I suppose you are right in the sense that if a business is capital intensive and wants to expand quickly, then it's going to have to go to the capital markets to get money.
And if it's a family business, it would then either dilute the family
Indeed.
and not become a family business, or it just has to borrow money, which gears it up and makes a particular financial structure that you may not want. And your take here?
The access to capital has got to be an absolutely key problem. I mean, we are a very small business, a 15 million turnover. You know, we could make 10% plus in a good year. We haven't borrowed since, I don't think, about 1992, but if we had serious expansion plans which required capital, well, you don't have to talk about banks to know that you can't easily get the money from them, but if you went and sold a proportion of the business to somebody else, then that would bring in a dynamic, potentially a short-termism, that could end the business as you know it.
Well, let's talk about some of the advantages, because there are advantages to family businesses, and Francis Fukuyama recognises one, which is, by and large, you trust the people in your family. And there is, I suspect, particularly given the age of some of your companies, there's a long-termism about it. What you don't have, which you might in a PLC, is a chief executive who comes in, wants to make an impact for 2 years, and doesn't really care what the state of the business is.
There's another aspect to our business, which is, if you use the term family, you have to think a little bit more broadly, because we are located in an environment where the villages around us and the towns around us have provided employees for us for over 200 years from families. And if you were to walk into our factory tomorrow, I could introduce you to mothers and daughters, brothers, sisters, uncles. You know, everybody's related. Everybody has a history to their family involvement with John Smedley. What that brings is an interesting dynamic in its own right, which is a commitment and a loyalty and a drive to see the thing succeed beyond what you might normally expect, which is a very interesting dynamic working in a company like mine.
I do believe there's something about family-owned businesses where the shareholders are actively engaged and it means something to them. So if you're working for a family business, you know who your shareholders are. And we found in our business that the people who work for us really do like knowing they work for someone rather than for a sort of amorphous stock market person.
So really you're saying you've got the advantages of better shareholders than the average PLC, whose shareholders are, let's face it, pretty disengaged from the business and express their discontent by just selling the shares to somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I calculated one time that our business has survived something like 6 global depressions in its lifetime, in its existence. And the shareholders, if their objective is to see the thing to continue for a long period of time, they have to, I suppose, get a good return in the good times, but be prepared to accept a not such a good return in the bad times. And to a broad degree, they do that.
Right, we've talked a lot about the effect of family on business life. I suppose I'm also quite interested in the effect of the business on family life. I mean, does it change a family?
Yeah.
Go on, Julie.
Definitely. Well, when I grew up, Deidre was always around. It was like having a baby. It had to be, looked after. But then when we moved out and they went into a factory, into units, it always did come home. It didn't matter. Wherever we were, Deidre was there. We could fly off on holiday and Deidre would still be there, between my mother and my father. The family gets together. Deidre was always there. He was sitting at the table with us.
You must spend the most inordinate amount of time with family members. I mean, I love my family dearly, but I don't want to go to work with them every day. I mean, that's the last thing I'd want to do.
I totally agree with you. I sometimes think how much time I spend with my brother and my cousins. What is going on? But you're not really there in that sense. What they are is they're your family partners in business. It's not quite the same as family. We do get on, so it's not like spending far too much time with my brother and my cousins.
But do you spend Christmas with the family you've been working with during the year, or do you say, OK, Christmas, we're going to do that with friends, for goodness sake, in order to get away from
but I would often spend Christmas with my parents, and my brother would be there, so we're working together, and it's fine. We have been in agreement with my father ever since we were on holiday once, and we're driving back from a restaurant, and suddenly Dad was looking at his email, and he said, "What's happening on this particular thing? Why haven't you done it?" And I said, "Right, that is absolutely enough. I had enough of all this, Dad. You just can't talk about the family business at moments like this. We can chat, but let's just try and control it a wee bit."
A good place to finish, I suppose, is to cast your businesses into the future. We started with appointments and how you get your job and making sure that Duff family members don't take over the companies. What about your offspring? Are they raring to go? Are they aiming to be something different? I mean, there are lots of choices.
We've got about 15, 16 children who could inherit the business, and a lot of girls amongst that, and we're very, very keen for all of them to have every chance to come into our business. But as I said before, it's all about we want them to be fulfilled and happy.
So you're not cajoling them.
But in the background, what we're doing is we're trying to make weights as attractive as possible to them, and we hope they'll choose it. If they don't choose it, so be it. But we are doing everything.
Any biting? Anyone?
Oh, I think there's interest. Yeah, my son at half term says, "Dad, I'd just love to have a walk around the business with you. Would you take me up on the train?" So I'm saying, "Yeah, I'd love to." And I'm thinking, "Yes, that would be great."
And of course, because family businesses tend to be more male, don't they? Because there's a sort of great tradition historically, a heritage of the young sons being passed the prime heir. But your daughters and the girls.
My daughters,
in the
I
family?
believe, I've got very bright daughters, and I've got every hope and expectation that they will be family owners and involved in our business. And I think, in fact, in the modern age, there's just no question about it. You've got to involve the females.
I used to always have a joke with my father that I was going to change the name of Deidril to Deidril and Daughter.
Absolutely.
The treble D,
But what's going to happen to your business?
Well, I haven't got any children, so my aim is to grow the business to the best, and then to make sure it goes in the right. I would never let it go to anybody that wouldn't look after it, because I've got too much of a tie to that company. I mean, if you cut me in half, I am Deidril Blue, so it means too much. So it would have to be the right buyer and the right time.
You just want to find the right owner out of the entire gene pool of the human race.
Yeah, that's the hardest part,
the right gene
because
pool.
Concrete cutting, I think, is very sexy. Very. But
there are people who may not agree.
I don't think the next generation might not. I mean, all these computers and programming and maybe getting out there and freezing cold and and drilling a hole.
So no, it needs to be somebody who finds it as
right.
exciting as you do.
Yes.
And Ian, what about your next generation, your succession planning?
I think let's say I do a good job and I'm there to influence possibly a succession later on. I have two very young daughters. Both of them get terribly excited because they understand that John Smedley is something to do with the world of fashion, and that they do really like that. But
easier than drilling.
Today, the family has two representatives on the board, essentially myself and my cousin Charles Marston Smedley, who's a designer, and he's the chairman of the business. And I think our role is to look at a generation who are probably in their late teens, early 20s, and there's quite a few of them to look at. Keep an eye on their careers, see how well they're doing, and one day approach one or two of them to say, are you willing, able and interested to do this job, and do it like that, really looking for the best, best amongst us.
All right, well, it sounds like family businesses, rather like families, come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. We've learned that and much else, but we'll draw to a close now. Just time to thank Ian McLean of John Smedley, Julie White of Deidril, and Tim Waits of construction firm Waits. Do visit our website, bbc.co.uk/bottomline. Details there of how to download the programme. Next week, we'll be talking about gambling. Join us then.
Evan Davies. The producer was Ben Crichton. We hope you enjoyed this programme. You can download other business programmes via the Radio 4 website.